that we're fortunate today to hear from one of the most creative actors of our time. In addition to her thoughtful work in popular media, on television shows such as Nurse Jackie and The West Wing, and movies such as Rachel Getting Married and The Human Stain, some of the shooting of which took place on this campus here, she has pioneered a whole new form of theater. It's a form that combines journalism and art to illuminate communities and organizations in conflict. By interviewing those on all sides of these ruptures and performing their very words, she manages to give voice to people who have had none while giving ears to others. Thus, dialogue can happen, often for the first time. Few artists have so effectively and forcefully used their work to advance issues of social change. Please welcome Anna Deavere Smith.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I don't know, at graduations, you know, you really want to hear any more words, but I know at Williams you're very studious, and you liked words, so I have some more, and this is called Speeches in Action. And I did ask somebody sort of what should I, because I've never given one of these baccalaureate speeches before, what should I bring? So I was told some wisdom. And so we've already heard some wisdom. Look to the rock from which we are hewn while pursuing justice. Think about the things that are worthy of praise. Isn't that nice? Support justice in all human endeavors, regardless of the circumstance. I'm pleased to be here in this wisdom. Thank you for the call to prayer. I hear that that's the first time that the call has been called here at Williams. The first time I heard the call to prayer was in Egypt, in a fancy hotel. And I heard this thing that I thought was just the music of the spheres. And I ran out of my room like a maniac, running around all these terraces, trying to find out if the world was either beginning or coming to an end. And I was told that it was the call to prayer. You know the story of the call to prayer? Have you heard? You know it? I went on a quest to find out about what that was, what we just heard today. And I was told by Imam Faisal Rauf in New York that the Prophet Muhammad left Mecca, where there was an assassination attempt on his life, and he went with his followers to Medina. And they built there the first mosque, built a mosque for prayer. And after having built the mosque, they wondered how they would call the people to prayer. And they said, well, we can't use a bell. Remember that. We can't use a bell because the Christians use a bell. We can't use a horn because the Jews use a horn. How will we call the people to prayer? And one of the followers of the prophet came and said, I have had a dream in which a man said, this is how we call the people to prayer. You can see it in your program. The way I was told it is a slightly different translation. God is most great. I bear witness that there is no God but God. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Come to prayer, come to success. God is most great. There is no God but God. He's smiling. He's going to smile more in a minute. So Imam Faisal Rauf put it this way. He said, the prophet said, this is an instruction to us. And he asked Bilal, who was an Abyssinian slave from Ethiopia. He accepted Islam in Mecca, and his master had whipped him and subjected him to immense suffering. He was the first African to become Muslim because he was a slave in Mecca.
And he, like, even today, the Africans are known for their musical voices, you know, and their rhythm and blues.
Imam Faisal Ralph gets worked up.
Their rhythm and blues and soul and stuff like that. Bilal had a beautiful soul, you know.
Look at him smiling.
So the prophet said, Bilal, climb to the roof and call the people to prayer. And make this call. People who heard it for the first time, they froze. Said, what's that? They freaked out, they froze. The fact that the call to prayer has such a compelling power to anybody who hears it is an act of grace. It calls you.
Imam Faisal Ralph gets even more worked up.
It calls you. It calls your soul. It's the call of the wild. What's that call of the wild? It's a sound that your soul perks up and says, what's that?
That's Imam Faisal Ralph telling us about what we heard.
When your soul perks up and says, what's that?
What I love about that story, Imam Faisal Ralph's definition of the call to prayer, is that he talks about grace as that moment when your soul perks up. Most of my life's work has been about the search for justice. I've kind of given up on that, and I'm looking for grace.
But I also love the part that goes, we can't use a bell because the Christians use a bell. And we can't use a horn because the Jews use a horn. And what I love about that part is because that part of the story is taking us to the idea of difference. The Christians, the Jews, the Muslims at this incredible epicenter that everyone calls their Holy Land and fights about, they need a different call to prayer to make, and each call has to be distinct. As an actress, you would think that I would long to be the same as a person that I'm portraying, trying to trick you into believing that I'm that person. But I'm not interested in the sameness of us. I'm interested in the difference of us because that clear difference gives us all an opportunity to walk the plank between me and you, yourself and the other who is dangerously an it, Martin Buber would tell us, and to do the work to take the leap of faith to jump and reach, and thus turning a possible it into a you, the broad jump. And love and grace are at the very bottom of that. When Chaplain Spaulding wrote to me a most eloquent letter saying how pleased he was that I was going to be your baccalaureate speaker, he congratulated me for mirroring society. Mirroring society, and so early in my career, that was my goal. And in trying to understand something really about what mirrors were and are and what they do, and about the possible distortions that we can create when we think that looking at the other is simply a mirror of ourselves, I went to a physicist in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to have him tell me about mirrors and distortions, and this is what he said. He said, okay, so a mirror is something that reflects light. It's the simplest instrument to understand, okay? So a simple mirror is just a flat reflecting substance. Like, for example, it's a piece of glass, which is silvered on the back, okay? Now, the notion of distortion, now that goes back into literature, okay? So I'm trying to remember from art. This is word for word from an interview that I tape recorded a long time ago. You probably know better than I, but you know the story of the pretty woman and she looks in the mirror and she's a witch? Because she's evil on the inside. Well, that's not a real mirror. as everybody knows, where you see the inner thing. Now, that really goes back into literature. So everybody understood that mirrors don't distort. So that was a play on words. That was a play on a concept. But physicists do talk about distortion. It's a big, big, big subject, distortion. So I'll give you an example. If you want to see the stars, you make a big reflecting mirror. That's one of the ways. You make a big telescope so you can gather a lot of light. And then it focuses at a point. And then there's always something called the circle of confusion. So if you don't make the thing perfectly spherical or perfectly parabolic, then if there are errors in the construction, which you can see, it's easy if it's huge, then you're going to have that circle of confusion, you see? So that's the reason for making the telescope as large as you can, because you want that circle to seem smaller. And you want to easily see errors in the construction. So you see, in physics, it's very practical. If you want to look up in the heavens and see the stars as well as you can, without distortion, if you're counting stars, for example, and 2 look like 1, you've blown it. That's an argument for the celebration of difference. Come with me for a minute to San Francisco. Before you were born, for sure, maybe before your parents were born. And I'm going to an acting school at this point by fluke. I had no intentions of being an actor. And I thought I was going to do something about social change, but by the time I got to San Francisco, the revolution was over. And I walked into an acting class by total accident, and I saw that people were changing in front of my eyes. And I thought, well, before I'm so high and mighty and think that I'm actually going to change things or change the world, and I know some of you have that aspiration too, I thought, well, why don't I just study this kind of changing in front of me? My classmates were changing. And I strolled into my Shakespeare class, and I didn't really know very much about Shakespeare, and the teacher said, her class was all about speech as an action, the idea that if you say it, the character will come. You don't have to add anything. She said, take 14 lines of Shakespeare and say them over and over again until something happens. That's all she said. Most of my classmates thought she was high. So I went down to a very poor area of San Francisco. You can still go now, the Tenderloin, where people are down and out, where there is no justice, where there is no grace, drug addicts, still the same, mentally challenged. And I went into this bookstore. There were all these used bookstores. Nobody was buying a lot of books of Shakespeare, and I bought one. And I went home, and I just looked for 14 lines spoken by a woman, and any 14 lines. And I found Queen Margaret in a lot of distress, in a moment of crisis, in the play Richard III, where Richard III has killed her son and everybody else's sons, including those of the mother of Richard III. And she says something like, that dog, speaking of Richard, that dog that had his teeth before his eyes to worry lambs and lap their gentle blood, thy womb let loose to chase us to our graves. And I just said this over and over again as I was instructed to do, and after about 2 hours of doing that, I saw Queen Margaret. Hadn't used any chemical substances, I promise you. And it's so clear as day. Here I was, studying to be an actor, thinking I could change into somebody else, but that somebody else, clear as a bell, was standing right there in front of me, small, jeweled, and I knew that was not me. It could never be me. And there began the work of my lifetime so far, which is to figure out what was it about the conjuring language of Shakespeare that made that figure as real to me as the Tooth Fairy was when I still had an imagination as a little kid. And so I decided, what is that magic? And so I've spent a lot of time going around interviewing people about their lives,
using something that my grandfather also said when I was a kid, which was, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. Trying to become America by becoming the words, by really putting myself in those words, the way that you would think about putting yourself in another person's shoes. And what some people would say that I made a mirror, some people would say that I increased my empathy, some people would say that I suggested that to be empathic is that simple. But what I really learned was the power of words and the power of the possibility of the potence of taking on another person's words. The power of difference. Let me give you a little teaspoon of wisdom from a bull rider that I met. So different from me, a Republican, doesn't like immigrants, doesn't like homosexuals, but has some wisdom. I asked him about riding the bull, and he looks at it in a way as a fantastic American story. He says, basically, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist because, you know, when you ride bull and do good and riding, just feel like ain't nothing in this world that could beat you up or nothing like that. Because when you think about it, we shouldn't be able to stay on the back of a bull that's trying to buck you off. Because we weigh 150 pounds. They weigh over 2,000 pounds. And I think what keeps you on that bull is determination. I ride on more out of determination than confidence. A lot of people ride out of confidence, but confidence to me is like being cocky, but in a good way. But determination is like, you know, just forget the form, get the horn. That's what Tuff Hedeman said. He's in the movie 8 Seconds. Determination is like you're going to hang on that bull even if you're riding upside down. Determination is like you're going to ride till your head hits the back of the dirt. And so because of meeting Brent Williams in Shoshone, Idaho, I start every class, every semester, saying, as I say to you, this teaspoon of wisdom, which is that confidence is overrated. You're nodding. Confidence is overrated. Confidence is overrated. With the world as it is today, with so much unknown, rather increase your stamina for doubt. Increase your stamina for doubt. A teaspoon of wisdom. When I played the National Security Advisor on the West Wing, I asked former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger to give me some teaspoons of wisdom whenever I got a new script. And the best advice he gave me was that as National Security Advisor of the United States, you have to make a decision without having enough information. And most of the time, the information that you have may be the wrong information. So I sought out some information about what I should do today. I got some information from Madeline Berkey, Williams class of 2010. And she told me that what I should do here today was to embody the purple cow. To embody the purple cow. And I said, well, I don't have a purple cow suit. I said, well, what does the cow say? I'm a person of words. I said, does the cow moo? She said, I don't think he really moves. So she told me about this. Your cow, the purple cow that she said really kind of is the perfect emblem for this place where you're not just academic and you're not just sports people, but there's a kind of a fluidity that you have here, that you don't take yourselves so seriously. You don't take yourself so seriously. And I offer you that even as I want to suggest to some of you that you take your mirrors where it's very serious. And so I want to just give you a piece of something that I found, a few words that I found in Rwanda, of all places, and to say something about what it means to go, especially now, looking for moments of grace where there is no justice. So I went there 10 years after the genocide, and I interviewed many people, people who were unjustly killed. It was a genocide. And people who lost people who were killed and those who had done the killing. And I met an interesting young woman, Ingrid and Emma, who told me about what it was like when she was 6 years old. And even then, she was thinking through not just what happened to her, but even about what she could have maybe done. And so she's talking about this one moment where she was with her sister alone. Her family had all gone in different directions because they thought that, you know, if you got caught, if you went in different directions, not everybody would be killed at the same time. And so she was 6 years old, wandering with her sister, and she lost her sister. And she wandered through the night in the woods. And finally, she says, in the day, she said, you know, I'm alone in this place. And she went to the streets, and she would see militias from the other side who said, this kid is Tutsi. She says, you know, I wouldn't say anything. I was so afraid, and I kept walking, and I found my sister the next evening at a place where they had stopped people, and they were taking people to be killed. And she was one of them, and I was one of them. And they were like, you know, take her, she's going to be killed. And they were taking us to a mass grave. So what they did, they would line you up. They would, you know, like make a line, and they would, you know, cut your head and throw you in the grave. But at that time, when we were lining up, and we were the next to be killed, they said, you know what? We're tired. We're just going to go home and eat. You kids, just go. Go. You're going to be killed. You're going to be killed by sorrow, by hurt, by pain. That's how they say it, that we were going to be killed by sorrow, by hurt, by pain. Because you would think that we had seen so many people killed that we would be killed by sorrow, by hurt, by pain. Right now I'm at Stanford, and I'm learning. I'm learning a lot. I hope that one day I'm going to be a doctor in the future, and I'm learning a lot of science and a lot of biology and chemistry, but I'm also learning how to think and how to hear, how to listen and how to understand. And I'm learning about myself, my best self and my worst self. And I'm learning about other people. And I'm learning about my source, Rwanda and Africa, away from it. I'm learning a lot. Grace? Grace. I'm not very sure that what I mean by grace is what you mean by grace. For example, when you ask me, did I forgive the people who killed my family? I said I forgave them. But that's not really true, because forgiveness is something that you give when you're asked for it. If someone says, forgive me, you will forgive them. But I just give them grace. I release them. I say, you know what? You're fine. You know, I release you. If you come and ask for my forgiveness, I'm ready to forgive you. It's ready for you to come and take it. But in the meantime, right now, you're very oblivious, and they don't understand what they've done. And they're still wronging me. So right now, I just give you grace. I release you. I'm not holding on to you in my heart anymore. That's what I mean by grace. Ingrid and Emma, who is your sister in Palo Alto, California, graduating from Stanford University after having survived the Rwandan genocide at 6 years old. Now, what happens when I turn my mirror to a story like that? Is it that I become more empathic? I say what I get is more knowledge. I learned some extraordinary language like, you kids, you're going to be killed by hurt, by pain, by sorrow. I learned the idea of forgiveness as an opportunity to have your own heart be released by letting go, by letting go. So what I have learned so far about speech and the action of speech is the following. If you'll take your ear that has been fine-tuned by this extraordinary time at Williams, if you'll take your ear, your mirror, and turn it towards another who is in a crisis, they will show you that they have extraordinary linguistic gifts, extraordinary ways of using everything they have to bring dignity back into their lives and meaning to the world. And that's exactly what Queen Margaret was doing when she cursed and prayed the mother of Richard III, who had done such horrible things. And so if you turn your ear, your mirror, to someone who is broken, they will do an extraordinary creative act in your presence to reconstruct themselves. And in that moment, your soul will perk up, I've learned, and say, "What's that?" Congratulations.